Welcome everyone to the Reading Writing Corner. I am your host, Leanne, and today we are going to be talking in this first part of the video, a non-spoiler review for A Night to Remember by Walter Lord. If this is your first time here, welcome, come in, sit down, pull up a seat, and we shall get some discussion out of the way. And if you've been here before, you know the deal, you know how the drill goes. It's all think about this book. Okay, so this is part of a series actually called Titanic. I don't remember the second name, book title. Whoopsie. Anyways, yeah, it's a series. It's a detailed description on what happened to those upon the Titanic on the night it sank, basically. Now, what made me read this book, it was about the Titanic, a gigantic ship that sunk into sea a very long time ago, and I'd seen the Titanic, the movie. That's why. So, the blurb is, A Night to Remember remains the definitive classic tale of the sinking of the Titanic. Walter Lord interviewed more than 60 survivors before committing their searingly vivid recollections to his minute-by-minute account of the Titanic's fatal collision and the experiences of both passengers and crew. Under the pressure of the unthinkable, the swift plummet into icy waters of the ship promised never to sink. So this is actually a compilation of stories from the survivors of the sinking of the Titanic, a tragedy that cost hundreds of lives. These stories tell of the calm, the disbelief, and the eventual terror as the ship slowly sinks, as the ship slowly begins its ascent into the water. So, A Night to Remember did not have a set of characters, but rather a set of the Titanic and the circumstances that it found itself in on the night that it sank into the sea. The motive of every single human on that ship was to survive. Although, I gotta say that the band that played for the higher upper classes, they did not actually exhibit the motive of surviving. They just played as the ship was going down until they could no longer play, and they died on the ship along with the captain and several people who actually were trying to survive. So more than half of them didn't make it. There's a large list of people who did not make it because there was not enough boats. If you don't know the story of the Titanic, where have you been? If you've been under a rock, please dig yourself out of that dirt and push the rock off the top of you and go dust yourself off and be like, we'll find out what's about the Titanic. Why is it iconic? Why is it a classic? Why am I hearing about it? Because the Titanic is something that everybody should know about. It's a tragedy that happened that was promised never to happen, and circumstances that set it up allowed it to happen. And nowadays it's something that can never happen again. If you're vigilant, because of course there are still ships sinking in the sea all the time, but there are sometimes circumstances outside of their control. The circumstances for the Titanic sinking was actually within the control of several people upon the ship. Most of the characters do not react the way I believe they should have reacted. Most of the passengers did not believe the Titanic could sink and were not afraid until towards the end when the Titanic did actually start to sink, because they were told, hey, this ship is unsinkable. It can't sink. Don't worry about it. Well, it sunk to the bottom of the ocean. And that's been so long since it's been at the bottom of the ocean that if they tried to bring up any part of it, because we know where it is. We know the location of it. We found it eventually, because at one point we couldn't find it when we started searching for it. But we know where it is, the general area, because the general area shifts as the seabed shifts slowly over the years. And we have investigated it. We have sent what are those called, rovers, to go down in there and investigate and look and see. Naturally there's no human remains anymore because it's all been decayed and the ship is still decaying, but if they were to bring up that ship now, it would fall apart and the history of it would be gone. I mean, yes, eventually the history will be gone, but that might take another 100 years or so to do, and we'd rather preserve it for as long as possible. The genre of this book is actually considered nonfiction because it actually is. There's no considered. It is. It's nonfiction. It actually happened. Though some of the people's thoughts and feelings about it, what happened, could have been exaggerated, because when something traumatic happens to you, sometimes there's an exaggeration of the events of it happening. But for the most part, what Walter Lord did was that he gathered all the information he could, and he pieced together what people were consistently saying. So instead of people saying something that was one off, he would take what several people were saying and he would put them together to make it a consistent story. So that way, what was consistent between several passengers was obviously what happened. And if one passenger said, "Oh no, we went off this way," and the other one's like, "No, we all did this," then he would know, oh, this person's remembering differently and it's not the actual events. Because I don't know about you, but traumatic stuff, people remember all over the place. And if you can find consistency in what they remember, then you can find consistency on what happened. Did this live up to my expectations? Yes and no. Yes, in learning more about the people and what they felt during the time that Titanic was hitting the iceberg to the sinking of the ship and the desperate call for help. No, because I didn't think it was actually going to be written like a story and how the details and everything were given. I thought it'd be more factually listed than it was, so that was a little disappointing on that aspect, but it is what it is, and I still thought it was a good book, sort of. Which character did I relate to most? I should totally skip this, but I didn't. I said there were no characters that I could relate to the most because I did not get to know any of them well enough to feel like we could be friends or something. And they're all, well, I think they're all dead now. I think nobody who was on the Titanic at the time that it sunk and survived are still alive. I'm pretty sure 99.9% of them are officially dead now, which is kind of sad to think about. And it happened in 1914, so 1912, sorry. It did happen in 1912, which was over 100 years ago now. So yeah, basically, all the people who were on the Titanic at the time that they sank are dead. There's no more to go around. It might be their grandchildren or something like that who were told stories of what happened on the ship and everything like that still around. But no one who can actually recount from their own memory what secondary character stood out the most. Look about for the answer. My only real thought about secondary characters is the fact that so many of the characters in this book were their own main characters, because obviously you're your own main character in your own life, because everything you try to do, it revolves around you, but you aren't the main character in the world. If that makes any sense to you. If it doesn't, pardon the confusion on that. What was more important, the characters or plot? Neither, as this was a detailed reconstruction of the survivors' experiences for the sinking of the Titanic. I was going to say ship. It's true, it's a ship, but it's also the Titanic. It has its own name. And how they acted and thought during that entire process. Which, like I said, were not the way I thought they would. Because, I mean, like, the ship's going down. My lord, panic! But in a calmly manner. Like, don't run over people and kill people and all that stuff, but still, panic. I'd panic. Oh my god, the ship's going down. Oh my god. You know, that's what I'd do. But I thought that's what they would do. But, no. There were technically multiple voices, but at the same time, a narrative source, someone to piece together the different accounts of the sinking of the Titanic. It did not affect my reading of the recounting experiences of the survivors. It was just a little weird in how it was written. Like, they would go from this person was doing this to this person was doing that to this person and that person, you know, and it was a little different. Like, some people were sleeping, some people were doing this and all that stuff. So it was a slight shifting, but it was pieced together through a narrative. But they were all different opinions and thoughts and emotions, so it did have a lot of voices within it. Should you go and read this story and the series? Yes, if you want to know what the survivors of the Titanic experienced as it sank into the sea, though we shall never know the accounts of those who died in the panic, and a lot of them drowned, so, you know, experiencing that, we're never gonna know. But if you want to, what makes this a classic, what makes it something that a lot of people read and think about, because I mean, there was only, according to the back of this, 20 lifeboats for 2,207 passengers, and they could fit about 65 people on those lifeboats. So that's not a lot. Like over 1,000 people died, and it's a tragedy that, well, it's a tragedy that should never happened, but it did. There's reasons for that. So, if you don't want to be spoiled, you can go ahead and skedaddle, get out of here. But if you want to leave me a like, comment, or even a lovely subscription, you can go ahead and drop that stuff down below, and leave and go read this book, and then come back to the spoiler, or leave and go watch Titanic, and then you can come back and read the spoilers, because either way, you're going to be spoiled by either reading this book or watching the movie. That's literally all there is to it. In this book, you do meet a lot of main characters, a lot of side characters, and unimportant recurring characters. And unfortunately, there are way too many to list here, as there are over 60 accounts of what happened during the sinking of the Titanic. Because not only do they have the sinking of the people on the Titanic, they have the people on the Carpathia. I think that's what the name of it is. The California as well. So there's like a couple other ships that get brought into it on what is happening with them, like the Virginia. So several ships were brought in on what was going on their side of the story as well, when they started getting information about who was where, what they needed to do, and all that stuff. 'Cause the people that they actually wrote about within here that they included in the details of what happened was the Californian and the Carpathia. There you go, the Carpathia, which was actually what picked up a lot of the boats that were hanging out in the waters. So I'm not going to list any of the people's names or the POVs that were done, because there's just too many technically. This was definitely told in chronological order of what happened from the moment before the iceberg struck the side of the Titanic to the survivors being brought to America. It had appropriate language. There was no foreshadowing or suspense, because if you come into this book, you should already know what's going to happen. But I guess you could consider not. I mean, I guess so long as you haven't lived under a rock and do not know the story of the Titanic, you will know what's going on. The reader will obviously know the general story of how the ship slowly sank and how the people went from being calm to terrified and trying to live in a mass confusion. But if you have lived under a rock and you haven't heard about the Titanic, and you've picked this book up and you're like, "A Night to Remember? About the sinking of the Titanic? The true story? What is that?" There will be a lot of suspense and like, oh my god, who will survive? How will they survive? Why is the ship sinking so slowly? And all this stuff. So there's that, and there's definitely the foreshadowing of help not arriving. Because like at one point, one dude is like, "Would you quit, speaking to me? I'm trying to listen to something else." And all they were trying to do was warn them about icebergs dead ahead, because they were stopped. And this ship, I think it was the California, which was trying to warn of ice, but it got cut off before she could give the location of it, and they were stalled, they were stopped, they weren't moving because of it. Same with the Carpathia, they were stalled and not moving very far, and they're like, "Hey, icebergs ahead, don't go nowhere, stop, quit moving." And the people on the Titanic were like, "Oh, well, we're the Titanic, we're unsinkable, we'll be able to sit there and swerve." And to their credit, they did swerve, but they still hit the iceberg. So the background of the Titanic and how it was built is given in here, sort of, a little bit of details about that. Like the creator of the Titanic, the one who drew up all the blueprints and everything, and those who built it. It also goes into how the sinking of the Titanic changed the way the ships and boats were made, and how many lifeboats that were allowed to be carried on it for their passengers. Basically, you have to have enough lifeboats for all of your passengers. And most people now have to be wary of underneath the water. Just because you can see the iceberg on top of the water, above the water, does not mean there is not an iceberg underneath, because that's basically why the Titanic sank. Is because even though they avoided the top half of the iceberg by steering to the left, or starboard I think it's called, they still hit underneath, because there was a part of it, iceberg, that was jutted out further than the top half, because they brushed against the top half, but the bottom half literally jammed into the hole underneath the water and just ripped from one end to the other and started filling with water. And they're like, Titanic wouldn't sink if 4 out of the 6 holes were, or 8 holes were filled with water. But if all 8 holes are filled with water, Titanic can't stand up. And basically that's unfortunately what happened, is that all the holes got breached in one way or another, and they all filled with water, thus bringing the whole ship down, which was what they thought they could avoid doing by having more than one type of hole that could fill with water. Yeah. So the title of the book is that it's a night to remember for the survivors of the Titanic, because those who did survive, well, they never forgot. And I doubt they ever would have. I mean, like I said, 99.9% of them are dead now, and if there are any of them still alive, they still remember the Titanic. I will guarantee that, because nobody can forget trauma like that. The cover of the book, of this book that I particularly have, is of the Titanic sailing through the night, chugga 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 choo choo, on the ocean floor, you know? So what stood out as memorable to me in this was how circumstances with the Californian and the Titanic did not bode well or line up for them. After all, the operator for the Californian retired at 12:15 without anyone taking over to listen, because they didn't think there was anything going on. They thought the Titanic had stopped. Thought the Titanic was not going to go nowhere. And unfortunately, that is about the time that the people in the Titanic got on and sent out their first one type of distress signal, and then the SOS distress signal, and started shooting up the flares. And then like everybody's like, well, what is all this stuff going on? And they're like, it looks like they're just having a fun party. And white flares were not bad flares, apparently, because they're like, oh, what were all the flares? They're white. Oh, well, there's nothing to worry about. Strange, but don't worry about it. That's basically what they thought. So my favorite passage from the story is, well, from the collection of stories at the very end, because it talks, after a certain point, it's just talking more about like in chapter 7 onward, it's like, as the sea closed over the Titanic, Lady Cosima Duff, Gordon, and Boatman remarked to her secretary, Miss Fracello, there is your beautiful night dress gone. So basically it goes on to talk about what happened after the Titanic, but the part that I liked the most was that never again would men fling a ship into an ice field, heedless of warnings, putting their whole trust in a few thousand tons of steel and rivets. From then on, Atlantic liners took ice messages seriously, steered, cleared, or slowed down. Nobody believed that a ship was unsinkable. I also liked, which also in it, where it talks about how, and then there were no more liners with only part-time wireless. Henceforth, every passenger ship had a 24-hour radio watch, because that was why the Californian retired. They didn't have no one to take over his shift because he was part-time, and it was middle of the night, and they're like, I'll just pick it up in the morning. You know, nothing bad should happen. And it was also the last time a liner put to sea without enough lifeboats. The 46,328-ton Titanic sailed under hopelessly outdated safety regulations. An absurd formula determined lifeboat requirements. All British vessels over 10,000 tons must carry 16 lifeboats with a capacity of 5,500 cubic feet, plus enough rafts and floats for 75% of the capacity of the lifeboats. For the Titanic, this worked out at 9,625 cubic feet. This meant she had to carry boats for only 962 people. There were boats for 1,178. The White Star Line complained that nobody appreciated their thoughtfulness. Even so, this took care of only 52% of the 2,207 people on board, and only 30% of her total capacity. From then on, the rules and formula were simple indeed. Lifeboats for everybody, regardless. So, yeah. Ships might look pretty, but they have a bunch of lifeboats on them, and they're required to make sure everybody that's on there can get on a lifeboat and live and be safe. My favorite quote is, the legend is, of course, that the band went down playing Never My God to Thee. Because nobody can be for sure what the band was actually playing in the confusion. Some people said it was this song, some people said it was this song. And the band, instead of trying to get themselves to safety, decided they were going to go down with the ship, but they were going to try to put people at ease and calm them down and stop them from panicking, as they were doing at that point, because the ship was actually full on sinking and listing to one side because of how much water was being filled into it. And they were like, let's just calm them down as we go down with the ship, folks. And they were just like, oh yeah, let's just do it. And then they just started playing, and they went down with the ship, man. Went down with the ship. What I thought about the ending of this book. I am happy that people did survive the sinking of the Titanic, but it was a tragic end for hundreds of people, and most of them were third-class passengers that never got a chance to escape the sinking of the ship. Because some people locked it and barred them from getting out and refused to let them out because they were like, you gotta wait your turn. All the upper classes have to go before you, and then we'll let you out once we get the signal that we're free to do so. But that signal never came because they didn't have enough lifeboats to put everybody on it. And the majority of the people that died were third-class passengers because they were not allowed to try to get on the lifeboats themselves. Like, the back of the book ends with a lot of passengers, and it's like the third-class passengers are the most listed here. So the passenger list we have here that came out, every single one of them, those saved are the italic marks, and honestly there's a lot of the saved from the first class and a lot of them saved from the second class. But the third class, there's not really a lot of them, and they take up a lot of the pages in the back about, you know, them, because there was a lot of third class people, and 90% of the third class people didn't make it because they didn't want them to, because they wanted to load up the upper classes, the first class and the second class before the third class, because that's how they thought it should go. But still, it didn't go as planned. What book did it remind me of? This book did not remind me of anything, but it did make me want to watch the 6-hour, or was it an 8-hour Titanic movie again? Makes me want to watch it again. Because even though the story of Rose Dawson and Jack are probably 99.9% false, it still does a lot to show what happened to the Titanic and how it sank. Okay. Now this book, as you know, is part of a series called Titanic, and it is a duology. There are only 2 books, and like I said, I don't remember what the second book is called, but I'm not going to go out and reach for it. I just read this one because it was thrifted. Honestly, that's all it was. This edition contains the complete text of the original hardcover edition. Not one word has been omitted. So, it's everything that was ever said. And I like how it says plan of boat deck of the RMS Titanic, and it shows you like pictures of the boat, the ship, the front half, the back half, I think, the stern, the bow. So, like, really, everything's just there. I'm not gonna go get the second one because unless I thrift it, I have no interest of going for it because I don't really like reading a lot of nonfiction stuff. But this, I thought was gonna be a lot of good. So I rated this a 3 because I went to this with the movie in my head, and I suppose I should not have had it there. Though I did discount the romance from the movie because obviously that's not important. Okay, the romance was not important. Also, I did not think this book would be more about the survivors' accounts than about the Titanic in a more factual way. I thought it would be like a list of like, this is how this happened, this is how this happened, and then more about, you know, how the night progressed in a more clerical way than it was in a more of an emotional way, because that's what it was. If you think I deserve a like, comment, or your lovely subscription, please drop it down below. I will see you next illusion.